Hello guys, it's Miss Muse. We're going to try the video again to see if this will help with filling in your notes. So you should have at your desk a copy of the flashback, a blank flashback, and your guided notes. So if you don't have that, pause the video, get it first. Okay, so the new unit of flashbacks is Unit 10, the early Cold War era. So write that at the top of your flashback sheet. Okay, number 1, the term Cold War refers to which of the following things? So which of these do you think the term Cold War comes from? Number 2, the Marshall Plan was designed to help who? The Marshall Plan was designed to help who? And if I go too fast on the flashbacks, just let the sub know to pause the video. Okay, number 3, following World War II, the United States adopted which of the following policies towards the Soviet Union? So which of these policies do you think we adopted towards the Soviet Union? All right, number 4, the black line on the map below depicts what symbol of the Cold War? So this black line right in here, what symbol of the Cold War do you think that represents? All right, let's go over the correct answers. Number 1, the term Cold War refers to which of the following things? What do you think? Correct answer is the tension and potential for war that existed between the U.S. and Soviet Union. So on your flashback, just write Cold War, tension and potential for war. So there wasn't actually a war fought, but it was just the conflict kind of growing between the two countries. Okay, number 2, the Marshall Plan was designed to help who? Now this one you would totally just have had to take a lucky guess or studied it before. But who do you think the Marshall Plan was supposed to help? Correct answer is Western Europe rebuild after World War II. So after the war is over, we give about $13 billion, which in today's money is about $130 billion, to Europe to help them rebuild after World War II because the country is just torn apart. So it would only be an advantage to us to help them rebuild. Okay, so on your flashback sheet, you can just write Marshall Plan designed to help rebuild. All right, number 3, following World War II, the United States adopted which of the following policies towards the Soviet Union? Correct answer is containment. It's about trying to stop a war from happening. So on your sheet, write United States, Soviet Union, containment. All right, number 4, what is this black line on the map depicting? And that is called the Iron Curtain. So the black line on the map represents the Iron Curtain. This is just the physical boundary that divided Europe into kind of the separate areas after World War II and before the Cold War. All right, so go ahead and set your flashbacks to the side, and we're going to start with our notes. So if you want to pause for a second to make sure you have your notes and your flashbacks are put up, All right, so the past couple of class periods and so far this unit, we've been talking about the West and its impact on Native Americans. And last time we did the different technologies that developed because we expanded into the West. You know, the railroads, barbed wire, the National Park Service. This lesson is kind of about how the industry, including railroads, built big business and how new inventions created a new demand for factories and work, especially in the bigger cities. And this all starts with industrialization. So, industrialization is the development of industries for the mechanical mass production of goods. So, when we're talking about industrialization, we're talking about factories. We're not talking about people in their homes or a small business making a product. We're talking about it happening on a huge scale. So it's the shift from making goods individually by hand to mass production using interchangeable parts and factories. So for that definition on your notes, you don't have to write all of this, just your best definition. A movement to mass production. That could be an easy way. Now, this movement is going to be led by what we call entrepreneurs. So you should have learned a little bit about this last year in your survey class. You may have done some research on entrepreneurs. You might have created your own businesses. I know we did that in my freshman class, created our own product. But an entrepreneur, the definition of that word, is the person who organizes, manages, and takes the risk with starting an industry or business. So think of entrepreneurs we know today. Steve Jobs, for example, being a big one. Anyone who has started a company, that is an entrepreneur. Now we're looking at the time period of the mid 1800s to the 1910s. And we call this the second industrial revolution because the first one is going to start in the early 1800s, late 1700s, where we have this move to urban areas and we have some production happening in factories. But this is where it's kind of all just revolutionizing. Inventions are coming out all the time. We have the first millionaires and billionaires because of their companies. So let's look at industrialization and oil. So in 1859, we had a guy named Edwin Drake, and he is going to develop the first steam engine oil drill. So a steam engine itself is a pretty crazy invention. You know, we have steamboats that are able, to take boats upstream, up the Mississippi. But the steam engine oil drill is going to make it possible to extract oil, or as they called it, black gold, directly from the ground. Now, because of the ability to extract the oil, we have this growth of oil refineries to purify the oil by lots of entrepreneurs. And once the oil has been purified, it can be turned into kerosene and then into gasoline. And as we know, even today in modern times, that's a product we all need to function. Kerosene for heat for a lot of people, and gasoline for our cars eventually. Now we also have steel. So this ability to start using steel in production. So in the 1890s, we discovered these really large iron deposits in Minnesota. Now iron contains carbon, and it bends and rusts pretty easily. So we have this need to transform that iron into steel. So there was a creation called the Bessemer process, which was the process used to make steel. It injected some air into the iron to remove carbon and any impurities. And because of this process, we now have created steel. Now, steel, how do we use steel, or why is it so important that we have it? We can use it for all kinds of things. Infrastructure. We have railroad tracks, bridges, buildings. The first skyscrapers are being built about this time. The Brooklyn Bridge, built in the late 1800s, 1900s, this huge bridge. Barbed wire, which we talked about last time. Seems like such a simple thing, but it had a huge impact on the West and people who lived there. Farm equipment. And then using it in architecture. This rise of the modern city, all because of the Bessemer process. Finding out how to take that iron, which by itself is not a good product to use in some of these things, and turning it into steel. Something that doesn't bend very easily. It's very strong, doesn't rust much over time. And the city of Pittsburgh, if you ever get a chance to go there, is kind of where all this starts happening. And that's why the football team is called the Steelers. Now, along with some of these new innovations in oil and steel, we just have inventions. I've always found inventions as just a crazy thing that someone or some group of people found something in their life that they thought, what? This could be done better, or I could add something to this and just create a whole new product. Now, in this last year, some of you created new products in your economics class. So maybe you found some of those needs. I know last year we had some pretty good ones. So probably the most famous person when we talk about inventions is Thomas Edison. And he creates that incandescent light bulb. So the light bulb that we know today. He's also going to later invent a system to produce and distribute electrical power. And he finds a way to harness the power of electricity, and it just revolutionizes our life. It's inexpensive. It's pretty convenient. How are we going to use this in businesses? In the factories, you could run machines off the electricity. You could have light so that the factory is operating 24 hours a day. You don't have to stop when it goes dark. People start using it in their homes. It starts first in the cities and then starts to expand. Electrical appliances are invented because of it. In some of the cities, electric streetcars offer an easy way to get around. That mass transportation. So a huge invention, a huge inventor that really changes, something so simple changes the way people lived in America. We have another inventor, Christopher Sholes, who creates the typewriter. So that really changes the way people work in the workplace. No longer does things have to be written out by hand or stamped on huge printing presses. Alexander Graham Bell, who creates the telephone, changes how we communicate with people. And with a lot of these inventions, we also have some new jobs for women. Some clerical, which is like a secretary, work for them in the offices. We have the garment and textile factories who hired a lot of women because their hands were small and it was perfect for the type of machines that they used. So with each of these new inventions, it's creating a new demand for jobs, which is great for Americans. Mm-hmm. And changing the way that you just live in general. And hopefully in the web activity that you did last class period, you saw some of these other inventions that changed the way people lived. All right, so what are some of the effects of the industrialization and some of these inventions? With everything, there's always positive and negative effects. So the positive is that it freed up some labor from just back-breaking work in factories. Instead of having people do some of these really hard jobs, we've now created machines that have the ability to do the same thing. It also is going to improve the standard of living for some workers. Being able to see, having light in your factory makes a pretty big difference, makes it less dangerous. It creates new consumer markets. So new people are buying things that they never even knew existed before, that they never even knew that they needed. But, and this is a big one, there are a lot of negative things that go with it. It was a huge harm to the environment, some of the things that we produced. Things that we are finding out, ways that we're finding to use natural resources starts to deplete the natural resources. A lot of these are things that once they're all gone, they're gone. It's not like it, renews itself. And because of the ability to use machines in factories, we start to really reduce how much the value of people. And we're going to talk about some of the real labor issues of the time, but when some of these huge factory owners see that they could replace a couple people with a machine, they don't really care so much about the person or how well they're treating the worker. And that's going to be a huge issue that's, I think, still around today. So that's just a little bit of background about industrialization, and hopefully most of it's a review. You should know a lot of that stuff, the positives, the negatives, some of those inventors. Let's look now at the big business part of it. So with the new inventions and with the new factories come a lot of people who are getting stupid rich. So from the mid to late 1800s, a lot of those entrepreneurs and companies start growing. They start buying up other companies who make similar products and just become these huge companies. And we call these entrepreneurs, some of them, robber barons. And we called them this in more of a negative way. So these were big businessmen of the late 1800s who used ruthless tactics to dominate industries. Now, one project that you're going to be working on is you're going to do some research on some of these guys. And you're going to have to decide, and this is kind of like your culminating assignment in your research, is if you think the person you researched is a robber baron, which means he just did whatever he needed to do to make a buck. He was all about, becoming as rich as possible. Or was he a captain of industry? And people saw captains of industry as people who were really, really rich, but did some good with the money. They didn't treat their workers super horrible. They donated lots of money to charity. And that's where you're going to have to find where your guy fits in. Is he a robber baron or is he a captain of industry? And we'll look at that a little bit more. Now, how do robber barons do it? So how do you get to this point where you control an entire industry? There's two different ways. One way is called vertical integration. This is where you own every step of producing and selling a good. So, for example, if you look right here on this chart, you own the iron mines, you own the steel factories, and then you own the railroads that you are using your steel to build. So you literally own every single part of it. And I'll show you a modern example of this too in just a second. So that's vertical integration. You own every step of the process. Then we have horizontal integration, which means you own all of the companies that manufacture a good. So you own every steel producing factory in the country. So anyone who wants to do anything with steel has to buy it from you. And we call this a monopoly. There's no competition. And this happens by merging companies, buying up all the stock of another company. And there's some modern day examples of this and some companies who have got in a bit of trouble because of it. Bill Gates in the late 90s, early 2000s, Microsoft was really the only program that computers used. It just was naturally on every computer. There were some Apples and Macs, but they weren't really popular like they are now. And the US government kind of took notice because when a company controls the market of a product, the product doesn't have to be as good. They can charge whatever price they want for it. And the US government has, since this time period we're talking about, been very against monopolies. And here's kind of another example of that. We're talking about tires. We start with the rubber, the raw rubber, processing it into tires, owning the manufacturing company that the tires are being put on, owning the shipping company that you're shipping the cars through, and then even owning the car dealerships. That would be the vertical. Horizontal would be owning all the manufacturing plants. So Andrew Carnegie is going to be one of these people who you're going to have to look at, or you could choose him as someone you think was a robber baron or a captain of industry. So he was an industrialist. He's considered a philanthropist, which means he donated some money, donated quite a bit of money. And in 1873, he's going to found the Carnegie Steel Company, who's going to use that Bessemer process that we mentioned earlier, where we've turned the iron into steel, and he practices the vertical integration. So if we go back and look at the vertical integration, that means he's owning every step of the process. Now he is constantly updating his technology to get maximum production. He provides to his employees stock options, which means they own a little piece of the company. He offers some incentives to foster competition among the workers. Whoever performs well at your job, you get some kind of incentive, a bonus of some kind. Now, robber barons are considered to be ruthless and selfish men. However, Carnegie is one of those guys who's generally considered to have been pretty honest and philanthropic. He started from nothing and became this, insanely rich person. And we think of him a lot of times as one of the only businessmen of the time to not earn the robber baron title. But that is up to you to decide. You may find someone else doesn't really fit the title, or you may think that he does. He gave about 98% of his wealth to various charities. That's about over $350 million at the time. He centered his around education advancement, free libraries, global peace. And 14 of these organizations that he started in the late 1800s still exist today. So we've got Carnegie Hall, which you may have heard of, which is kind of a symphony where they play music. That was started by him. If you ever go to Pittsburgh, this is kind of where his basis is. There are all kinds of organizations that kind of tout Andrew Carnegie as the founder. Now, most robber barons, though, didn't use the vertical. They attempted the horizontal integration. So just buying up all the other companies who do things similar to you. So having complete control over the industry, and that meaning you can charge any price for the product. So how do you merge? You use a holding company. You form a trust agreement where you work out deals with the other owners of the companies, and you buy it all up. Now, a holding company is going to be a company that buys all of the stocks of other companies. So, for example, McDonald's, let's say hypothetically they have 100 stocks. And that's not true. They have tons. If you own 51 of those stocks, you own the majority of that business. So that's what these companies do. So J.P. Morgan, for example, his United American Steel Company bought up all the steel companies, including eventually Carnegie Steel, and he becomes a steel monopoly. So that's one way you can do it as the holding company. Another one is a trust agreement. This is where the company's stocks are owned by a group of trustees that run all the businesses in the trust. So individual companies earned dividends on trust profits, even though the trusts were illegal. So, for example, John Rockefeller's Standard Oil Company and the Standard Oil Trust controlled 90% of oil processing by 1880. So just having these individual companies control oil, but agreeing to set like similar prices so that they can make as huge of a profit as possible. And here's some examples of political cartoons that came out at the time showing, the public had a really negative view on this. The Standard Oil Company here, you can kind of see it's showing almost as an octopus with its arms and every part of the process. And the same with Vanderbilt, where he controls all the different railroad companies. Now, here's some of their ruthless tactics that they use to get such huge profits. They paid their workers extremely low wages, and we're going to spend a whole day on that, just the reaction of the people who worked in these companies. They drove out any competition that didn't merge by selling oil at a lower cost than it cost to produce it, because they could afford to do that. They could afford to take a little bit of a loss. Then, when everyone's now buying your product because you sold it for a cheaper price, you've put the other guy out of business, then you jack the price back up again. They have no choice because there's now no competition. And a lot of critics pressured them to be philanthropic. Rockefeller kept most of his money, but he gave away about $500 million. And it funded the University of Chicago and a medical institute. But on a grand scheme of how much money he had, it wasn't a huge part of it. So these guys were smart. They're not dumb. They know how much money they're making, and they know exactly how to do it. Now, the federal government was concerned. They start getting concerned that making these corporations bigger and creating these monopolies were going to stop competition in a free market. Part of America is that anyone can start a business, and that whoever sells the best product at the best price is the one that's going to be successful. But when one company controls it all, their product can be kind of crappy, and it can cost a lot of money because no one can afford to compete against them. So the government decides to do something about this. They create the Sherman Antitrust Act. They made it illegal to form a trust that interfered with any free trade between states and other countries. So that trust, where the different companies work together, this was made illegal. But in this law, it wasn't very effective because it didn't really clearly define what a trust is. And corporations, as they still do today, find loopholes in the law and ways to work around it. So by 10 years later, the government had just gave up and stopped even trying to stop the monopolies. So let's look at a modern day example. How are corporations able to form monopolies? Let's use McDonald's. So let's think about the ingredients that are necessary to make a Big Mac. So you need beef, cheese, lettuce, onions, sauce, bread, sesame seeds, pickles. So how does McDonald's get all those ingredients? Do they own their lettuce farms? Do they own cattle ranches? Do they own their own bakery? No, they pay other companies to grow their products, to raise the cattle, to bake the bread, and produce all the other ingredients they need. The price McDonald's charges is driven in part by what they have to pay those companies. So the more they have to pay their lettuce farmers or cattle farmers, the more, as a customer, we have to pay. So because of that, they want to attract customers who might go to the competition instead. So what companies do we think McDonald's competes with? Jack in the Box, which isn't a lot of them around here, Taco Bell, Burger King, Wendy's. And in order to get the most money, McDonald's has to make a better product and make their price lower. So that's what a free market is whoever's making the best product at the lower price. So how can they make a lower price? They could use cheaper ingredients. They could operate at a loss. They could cut down on their costs, pay their employees less. Or if they wanted to cut down on costs without sacrificing their product or the service, they could buy up all the other companies they deal with. and give McDonald's complete control of the entire process of making and delivering hamburgers in the United States. So they could buy up all the cattle ranches, buy up the farmers, buy up the bakeries, buy up all the transport companies that bring the materials to the stores. And as a result, they've lowered the cost of making a burger over long term because they don't have to pay people for the cow meat anymore or the lettuce farmers. They own them themselves. So with lower costs now over the long term, McDonald's can lower the prices. And when their price is so low that nobody can compete with it, that shuts them all out. And after they've shut all the other companies out, they jack those prices right back up because no one is left to compete with them. So that dollar burger may be $5 now because it's the only place you can buy a burger. So that's just kind of a modern example. So with high prices, consumers are going to lose. And when one company takes control of that entire market, we call it a monopoly. And that is not supposed to happen in America. Not supposed to. Now, we're talking about all this stuff, and you think about today, really this whole movement just bypasses the South. You know, the Reconstruction in the South failed when we talked about that. We got the troops out. We didn't have an opportunity to really industrialize there. So most of it is based in agriculture, and they're really struggling to make profits. There are huge taxes on any materials or imported goods they want to bring in. There's less educated people in the South, so they don't have a lot of skilled workers. There's fewer railroads. If you look at this map and look down here at the South, there are some railroads, but not as much as what's happening here, which means it's harder to ship things they're making there to other places. So if I'm a company, why would I build a factory down here where it's going to take me 50 miles to get it to a railroad, or I could build it around here where there is plenty of railroads? So I think hopefully this just kind of gives you a basis of industrialization and how that leads to these big businesses. You have a few things to do today. First thing you're going to do, and these are all in the classroom, is you're going to read 2 historical interpretations on robber barons and captains of industry. So that assignment is in the classroom, and it looks like this. And it's basically going to give you 2 quotes, one from a historian in 1927 who describes robber barons. And the next one is a historian B in 1953 that's going to seeing those people from a different perspective. And it's very easy assignment. There's only 4 questions, but I just wanted to get you to have a better understanding of the difference between the 2 people before you start your research project, so you know what to pick for your person. So after you have finished the historical interpretations, you're going to choose from 4 guys to do your research on: Andrew Carnegie, Cornelius Vanderbilt, J. Pierpont Morgan, and John D. Rockefeller. Now, within your 4-person group, nobody can do the same person. So within your group, you'll decide who will do which one. Now, in the classroom, you will see a paper that says links for the robber baron or captain of industry worksheet. So depending on who you chose, I have put tons of resources where you can find anything that you want about these guys. There's quotes from them, there's websites, there's biographies, articles, anything that you're going to need to know about your guy. And this is what you're going to fill in for him. So you'll put at the top of the page who you chose under assigned individual. Tell me his birth and death day. Give me a picture of him. Tell me about his early life. Was he born into money or born into nothing? How did he acquire his wealth? Where did he start his business? How did it grow so quickly? How did they treat their workers? This is a big thing when you're thinking of what kind of person he is. What did he do with his money? Did he have insane houses? Look up. Some of these guys had just ridiculous wealth, and they bought crazy things and huge homes. Tell me all about that if they did. And then how did they donate their money? What did they do with it? Did they do some good things, bad things? What kind of organizations did they focus on? And then after you've done some research, and I want quite a bit of information in each of those squares, not just a sentence or so. Then you're going to get to your essay, where you've now had an opportunity to learn about big businesses, and you're going to come to your own conclusion as to whether you think your man should be viewed as a captain of industry or a robber baron. Now, your answer here needs to be a couple paragraphs. Tell me, from your research, what have you found out about him that proves he's the robber baron? What's some horrible things he did to his employees, or how he didn't use his money right? Or if he's a captain of industry, what's some good things he did for his employees? So really take us some time to go through that research and find out everything that you can about him. And that will be your assignment for today. If you missed anything from the notes, I'll put the PowerPoint in the classroom with all of these assignments too, so you can go back. And I hope you have a good day, and I will see you all next week.